Year one didn't go exactly how we wanted it to go for the Gators, but we certainly haven't jumped off the Billy Napier train, and we hope that none of you have either. Almost all of Gator Nation is still firmly behind Billy Napier heading into the summer of year two, but we wanted to get a national perspective, so we invited JD PicKell from On3 to chat about UF's head coach. So we're going to get right to it. JD, thanks for joining me. All right, so disappointing year one for sure, but UF still recruited very well. Recruiting well again so far for the 2024 class. So it really seems like it wasn't just a year one bump. It seems like Napier is pretty good at this recruiting game.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all seen the team photo on Twitter with all the blue polos, and like people have kind of memed that. But I mean, honestly, I think you got to be excited about the fact that he's really leaning into and prioritizing recruiting, which is something that, not to dunk on Dan Mullen, I'm sure he'll get a job at some point somewhere else, but
Sure.
that wasn't something that he was really leaning into quite as heavily as you and I both know you need to if you're going to be the head coach at Florida. And so for Billy Napier, I 100% agree. I think it's way too early to make any overarching judgments on what he's going to be as a head coach at Florida. Like, not all year one jobs are created equal, and I think he did the best with what he had. And I'm excited to see how he continues to develop this operation and get Florida back to, I know a lot of Gator fans expect it to be.
Do you get the sense from a national perspective that UF will actually be patient with him and will give him the time he needs to get this thing truly moving in the right direction?
That's such a good question. I hope so, because I think he can coach. Like, I think he can coach ball. I think he knows what he's doing. He's obviously won at a lot of places he's been.
Yeah.
Um, my concern is at a place like Florida with the resources and the branding and also just who your next door neighbors are, right? I mean, Tennessee's rolling, LSU's rolling after, 1 year with Brian Kelly, and then Bama and Georgia. So my concern is that we're going to look across the neighborhood and see the neighbors have a lot of nice cars and they got some nice trophies, and it's like, man, why don't we have that? We should have those things, and then kind of try and make a snap decision as opposed to playing the long game and believing in the guy that you hired. My other question would be, I don't know who else you go out and hire, and that's
Right.
impossible to know at this point. And I know there's a lot of names that'll get thrown out there, but my answer is I hope so. Will they? I'm not overly optimistic. If year two doesn't show promise, I don't know that there will be a ton of patience. Not saying he gets fired, but I just think
Sure.
those conversations will be a whole lot less fun after the second year.
You've got to think too that at a certain point of going, 2.5, 3 years before you replace a coach time and time again, at some point it makes the job less desirable if these coaches know that that's the only amount of time that they're given to turn around something that like they view as a project.
And it also would just throttle you in recruiting. If I'm a high school kid and you've had three coaches in the last 5 years, I'm like, why would I go there? That guy that hires me, or the guy that recruits me, may not even be there because he got fired a couple years after being hired. And so I think you're exactly right. A less attractive job to coaches and less attractive destination to recruits, without a doubt. And I mean, you and I've seen it at a multiple different locations at Georgia and Bama, like recruiting consistently and stacking those classes, like that's what gets you to where you would be. And I don't think you stack classes without having consistency at head coach.
What are some of the things that you think Napier does really well?
That's a really good question. I think I, I appreciate the way that he seems very even keel. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a job that's obviously enormously high pressure, very very visible spot. I don't think he ever seems overly flustered. And one thing that I was impressed by, the culture is sort of difficult to judge because we're outside looking in, so we don't know exactly what the locker room is like. But I remember multiple times feeling like, man, Florida has every opportunity to just kind of pack it up and, say, you know what, season didn't go how we wanted. We lost a couple close games, and they could have gone out there and just gotten throttled by Florida State. That, and everybody would have completely understood it. Year one head coach, roster that he didn't recruit, guys that weren't recruited by him, and they could have just mailed it in. I never saw that from this Florida team. Now, the bowl game is another conversation. I think the context is different. But I think he really is cultivating a culture of character, if that makes sense, and competitive character, which I was impressed by.
What are some immediate areas that you think he can improve on?
I think the defense is going to be very, very fascinating. I mean, we talked a lot about depth for them a season ago, and Dan Mullen takes a lot of the blame. And now having a full offseason under your belt, having transfer portal be a real thing, hiring a new DC, like there's going to be, I think, a little bit less room for excuses. Maybe you say, hey, it's a new DC, so that in itself is an excuse. I personally believe now having the portal, now having two edges of the portal, I think they're going to have a better chance to evaluate that with more certainty. And so I'm excited to see what that looks like. I really am. I think they've got a lot of guys that can contribute for them in big ways. Desmond Watson, I know he, for the most part, last year was reserved, but I mean, if he can get some real snaps, I think Gervon Dexter, or excuse me, Gervon Dexter had like 400 plus snaps at defensive tackle, which is like way too much
Sure.
for any defensive lineman to be having over the course of a season. So I mean, that stat in itself just tells you, okay, there's some needs to be met, and going to make sure they meet those, whether it's developing or whether it's the second portal window, to make sure those are addressed to go the length of the season.
UF has kind of done a revamp of their NIL program in the last, it's been underway for the last several months, but it was just revealed last week. They've got Victorious out there kind of replacing the Gator Collective. How big of an impact will an improved NIL help Billy Napier?
I think it'll definitely help. I think in the NIL space, and this is just my perception, our owner of On3, Shannon Terry, and our president of NIL, Grant Burton, can speak with much more certainty. My feel is the schools that are competitive in the NIL space are able to at least have a seat at the tier one table, which doesn't necessarily guarantee you're getting the top talent, doesn't guarantee that you're going to win games, but you're at least competitive for like those top recruits that I think as we get further and further into this NIL era, it's going to be like the price of admission to winning a national championship or to winning your conference. Like you're going to have to be on your P's and Q's for the NIL deal, right? Like that's kind of just the world that we're living in right now. So I think props to Florida for saying, okay, we're not good enough in this area. We're not going to give it 2 or 3 years to get some more data, and you know, we're not going to be slow to act. Like to them for saying this is here to stay. Let's be one of the players in the game.
So you mentioned having a seat at the table, you know, for NIL, and I think about hats on the table for recruiting. And in the past, there was no like award for having your hat at the table, right? There's no beauty in second place there. You get no points for that. But now that the transfer portal works the way that it does, how valuable is it to have your hat on the table, even if you're not initially selected? Because truly, you could still end up the guy at any given point, right?
1,000%. And I think the key is, okay, you get it to signing day and your hat's on the table, but now you got to make sure after he picks up the other hat, like that hat stays on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I know previously it used to be, I mean, way back before, you know, transferring and being able to have immediate eligibility was a thing. It was like, hey, you don't pick our school, that's fine, kick rocks. Like kind of the act is sort of over. Well, now it's like, you better keep that relationship. You know, you better not have just been acting that whole time, because guess what? That 5-star's back in the portal in 2 years and you're going to want him on your team. So I think the relational aspect is getting more and more accentuated, which is funny to say in the world of the portal and NIL, which kind of feels like it's leaning the opposite way, right? Like it's all about money. It's all about what can you do for me? Like the relationship piece of that, what's real is going to be the staying power for a lot of these schools and getting these guys their second try.
So essentially, the unintended consequence and probably positive of this is that the guys on your roster, you basically continue to recruit, right? So if you're a completely different coach than you were person during the recruiting visits, your players know, and they may very well find their way back into the transfer portal. But if you're a team that maybe they didn't pick, but your hat was on the table and you did like what you heard, it just wasn't maybe your first choice. In hindsight, maybe you look more genuine and they end up back at your program to begin with. So NIL has kind of in the portal changed recruiting for the positive too.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I think anytime you can emphasize the relational aspect of it and have it genuinely be about like, hey, what is the best fit for you? Are you going to commit to the coach that is, you know, the best developer and is going to actually help you make the real money in the NFL? That's where I think then NIL, you know, kind of catering to that could be a positive thing for sure.
All right, JD, thanks so much for joining us. Tell everybody where they can find your work and your content.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Y'all have a great show. You can find any of my work on the On3 YouTube channel. You can follow me on the socials, on Instagram, on Twitter at JD PicKell. But no, I'm fired up to watch y'all's Gators this coming year, and appreciate you guys again having me on this platform. Y'all do an awesome show.
Well, thanks. We appreciate you. Appreciate On3's JD PicKell for joining us. We appreciate his insight on Billy Napier and the direction that things are headed. We went in depth with him on the upcoming 2023 season and what UF fans should expect, so make sure you're subscribed and don't miss that. If you missed our video on who may commit to the Gators next, click right here.